Welcome to Keep What You Earn, your judgment and jargon-free zone for entrepreneurs of all levels. Get ready to learn how to scale your business, save money in taxes, and create a business that grows your wealth. If it feels like the financial side of business is like eating your vegetables, well then think of this podcast as the ranch dressing to make the process a little more enjoyable. My name is Shannon Weinstein. I'm a CPA and business owner on a mission to simplify money and empower others through knowledge. I hope this episode inspires you to take action, but remember that the information we share is for educational purposes only and is not individual tax advice. Now that we got that out of the way, let's start the show. We all know the importance of having really solid cybersecurity and cyber compliance in our businesses especially, but very few of us actually perform the behaviors and the habits necessary to execute on that. And it's really tough. It's kind of like eating your vegetables, doing your burpees, or frankly, anything I say on the show, right? It's tough to instill these habits of good documentation, vigilant cybersecurity, managing your passwords and everything that comes along with it. I get it. It totally is. But if we can have professionals like Dr. Seth Nielson, who's going to be on the show today, more in our ears, and to hear these things over and over again, hear the stories of what happens if we don't do it, and understand the risks, this is something that we can really start to do more of in our businesses that becomes second nature, and we don't even have to think about it anymore. So I'm excited to welcome on the show today, Dr. Seth James Nielson. He is a cybersecurity expert with specialties in forensics, cryptography, network security, and the security of data, including privacy. He has worked with companies of all sizes, has testified as an expert in court cases, and teaches as an adjunct professor at the University of Texas at Austin. Really, really exciting to have him on the show today to uncover, some of the basic habits that we kind of overthink when it comes to cybersecurity and some stories of what he's seen go wrong, which I was totally not expecting. So I'd like to welcome onto the show today, Dr. Nielson. Hello, Seth. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thanks. And could you just tell everyone who you are and what you do?
I'm Seth Nielson, and I'm a computer security expert. I'm a little bit of a broad type of person. I've been a little bit of everywhere, done a little bit of everything. So to give you an idea, I actually teach a class at UT Austin right now on computer security. It's actually a little bit of an interesting class. I'll just mention really fast about it. I was teaching in the computer science department for undergraduate computer science students, and then I took an opportunity that was presented out of the law school. They're like, we are looking for somebody to teach a technical class to people with no technical background. So these law students are very bright, but no engineering background, no computer science background. How technical can you get things in a semester? A lot of fun, a lot of really interesting insights into educating about computer security. So all the way from the academic world down to I work as a CISO for a small company as a contracting CISO, do computer security evaluation for a lot of different companies, do forensics, finds out how things happened, what went wrong. So I've been kind of the traveler. I've been everywhere. I've seen a little bit of everything.
And for those absolute beginners listening, tell them what a CISO is.
Oh, I'm sorry. I totally broke that, didn't I? Chief Information Security Officer, basically the person in charge of security for a company, try to make things as safe as they can be for a company.
Yeah, I love breaking down like any of the acronyms. Like, guys, you're not expected to know that. Don't worry.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, amazing. So we have something in common in that the things that we are passionate about are basically the vegetables of content. So it is the thing that's good for you that nobody wants to hear about. And yes. I'm with you on that when it comes to numbers, finances, and taxes and money. It's like, ugh. So, but cybersecurity, especially now, especially with AI, especially with how much we're using these devices, is so important. And I know that I would be hard pressed to find anybody listening who has not been affected by a cybersecurity incident or had a loved one affected by one. It's so common everywhere right now. So what is just to give a little bit of background, how did you get into a passion for this topic? And, has anything happened to you, any personal experience that really drove the point home for you?
Okay. This is a little bit, maybe you'll think this is silly, but when I was a kid, there was a role-playing game called Shadowrun. So kind of different from Dungeons and Dragons. It was set in a futuristic period, and they had these hackers who could like plug computers into their brain and like hack into corporate systems and steal their data. And this was written in like the 80s and early 90s. In fact, there's a novel, I just read it to my daughter, called Shadow Play, and it has a huge amount of what they thought hacking was like. And it's, of course it's very unrealistic, but it really did kind of capture my imagination. And I thought about it a lot from then on. And it wasn't really till I got into my PhD work at Rice University that I started doing computer security a lot. I got into some voting security research and some other really interesting things. That's kind of where I started doing it more as my primary professional emphasis. But I've been just fascinated with the idea of how do you bypass defenses? How do you get past things since I was a kid?
Yeah. And so what's funny is we'll call it a hacking situation was part of my inspiration in the accounting world too, in that I watched Office Space and I was like, that's, and I was like, how did they do that? Like, you can do that. And then that kind of prompted a lot of like questions of what else can people do and commit crimes and to get in. And I was really interested in the forensic side of things. So there's the hacking and then there's always I would say always, most of the time, there is a financial angle as to why they're hacking. There's some type of benefit on the other side. There's some type of buried treasure they're hunting for, right?
What's funny though? I'll mention as a side note, there are other motivations to hack. They don't show up very much. And we're actually really lucky because as bad as it is that people want to steal money, it's predictable. And we're, as bad as it is, it's a huge problem. But if we really had true cyber anarchists who were just absolutely dead set on just trying to bring civilization down, that would be even worse. So, if there's a silver lining, it's like, well, okay.
Financial warfare over psychological. Yeah, I would take that because I'm like, well, at least we know if where the money is, we need to protect it. Like we know where to protect it.
Exactly.
So let's talk about a few things. I think we need to, I say get out of the way, but I know they're super valuable, but everyone needs a reminder here and then of, of the financial and cyber hygiene, right? So the cybersecurity hygiene of the basics you need to do to protect yourself online. I think we have to cover a few of those, but I also want to talk more about like, the behaviors, the things that you can start creating habits around and the things that will help you become more protected without having to remember, things that you can kind of instill in your routine. So let's just start with a few of the key, we'll say basic fundamentals of how to protect yourself online and prohibit or prevent hackers from getting involved with you.
Yeah, so I actually listened to your podcast with another security person, Katie, was it?
Kathy. Mm-hmm.
Kathy, yeah. And that was actually really good. I'm going to start with one of the big things she hit on, which is password managers. I don't care how much people hear about this, they need to hear about it again. Let me just mention a couple of reasons why. Hopefully this will help people understand just how important it is. Just like Kathy said, you really do have to have a different password for every website. Why? Well, if a website gets compromised and they're able to figure out your password, say LinkedIn, there was a big LinkedIn compromise about 10 years ago or so. That was a big one. And they don't care about your contacts at work largely. That's not the biggest thing they were after. They were after people's passwords because if people are reusing passwords, there's only 3 major huge banks, and there's only maybe 50 when you add in regional banks. So you take somebody's name, you can come up with really good guesses for their username. And then if you know their password, you just start trying it at all kinds of places. And so reusing passwords is incredibly dangerous. Really needs to be one password per website. There's only one way you're going to remember good passwords for all those websites, and that's using a tool like a password manager. The other advantage is a password manager can help you generate a good password. We still to this day have passwords like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These are so easy for the criminals to break. I actually teach in my class a password cracking exercise where we demonstrate how you crack. And the students are always kind of surprised because I think we have this idea that they're sitting down and typing in the password at a keyboard. They're not. They have a computer program. I've got a special computer behind me. It's got like a whole bunch of computer processors. It can run like millions of tries a second. You just set it up and you automate it to try all possible combinations or common words. Got to have a good password as well. So you've got to have a good password and one for every website. Pretty much comes down to using a password manager. That's the only viable option for most people.
And is that secure, right? So if you're putting all your passwords in a password manager, right? We were always told, don't write down your passwords and don't put them in the same place. And so the password manager for, I guess, the way my instinct was built was don't put them all in one place. So what makes the password manager really effective?
That's an excellent question. Let me mention the concept first. I'll talk about the protections, but also everything is about risk management. And you just kind of have to compare your risks and trade them off. So risk of your password manager getting compromised versus the risk of a website being compromised that you've used the same password for, that's so much worse. So it's true. You actually do have a good instinct. Don't write them down. Don't put them in insecure places. So if you write it on a piece of paper, you're at an office, somebody sees it, that's not a good idea. The password managers are designed to encrypt all of the data. Encrypt is it's like secret codes. If you ever did secret codes as a kid, right?
Yeah.
It converts it into something that's completely unreadable unless you know the master password. So there's one password you have to remember for a password manager. It's your password, your master password. But if you have that protected, all of the data that's in it will be encrypted in a way that an attacker can't, even if they stole the file, they couldn't read it. So is there a risk? Yes, there's a little bit of risk. It's much lower than the risks of not using a password manager.
Yeah, I would agree. It comes down to just the how well you protect yourself, like the little things that you can control, right? So having that separate password is just one little step you can take to minimize the risk.
Yep.
Okay, so, let's talk about from the perspective of business owners, right? So not just your personal data or your financial data. What is unique about business owners and why they need to be especially vigilant on these types of security measures?
Well, one of the first differences is simply money, like we talked about at the beginning. So it is amazing how much fraud is committed with simple emails. So an attacker can send an email and say, here's an invoice. Well, I'm shocked as I work with some of the small companies I worked with, how automated people can be about an invoice. It gets into the system, it gets forwarded to the accounting person, and they just pay it. So attackers with very, very little technical specialty can just whip up a fake email and a fake invoice. And if they figure out a good person to send it to, will often get away with invoice fraud. So one of the big differences is, companies pay out a $15,000 invoice without, thinking about that too much. Whereas you and I would be like, I'm not writing a $15,000 check. So
Right.
That's one of the big differences.
Yeah, magnitude for sure. But also I think that they know the culture of, right? They know it will go to someone that's their job to pay invoices. They're probably pretty mechanical. And I also noticed that they'll target particular maybe demographics or maybe the type of context of the situation. So if they're emailing a business email, they'll do something like that versus I actually just had this happen. My mother-in-law had a car purchased in her name.
Oh, wow.
And she got an email that was like, thank you for your application through Chase Financing. And that was a legitimate email. So somebody was able to get and go in and try to purchase a car in her name. And we're like, God, there is really they will stop at nothing. All of these transactions are huge, all because of, maybe one misstep online to click a link. It's just out of control.
Right. Yeah, it's really difficult to rein it in. And this is something I think that's really important. We evolved as a species to have kind of some built-in fraud detection, but it was all designed around small, close-knit groups that knew one another. Now we're connected worldwide to everybody. I like to point out to my students that if they've got their laptop open, there's a terrorist somewhere in the world that there's a direct communication link, right? We're that interconnected. And so we have whole new forms of communication that are alien to the way we evolve. And we don't have built-in defenses for, oh, I can tell that this is fraudulent. And you add on top of that our technology for email and other communications was designed in the 80s when it wasn't used for these purposes, and there weren't these kind of security issues. And it's basically just completely untrusted communication, and we run all of our lives and our business using them.
Yes, absolutely. And now AI entering the picture,
Sure.
which, like, if AI can pretend to be anybody from a voice, and so it actually kind of scares me, right? Because, like, look at this example. AI very soon will have access to 500 episodes of Keep What You Earn and Shannon Weinstein,
Right.
and along with everything else I've ever put on the internet. It can probably access, if it gets through my passwords, it can then send an email to everyone on my email list as me asking them to click something. It
Sure.
could then, I'm sure it can't, like, anyone listening, please don't do this. But right, I'm now saying it, but it's kind of I've recognized the possibilities of what this is capable of doing for good and for evil.
Sure.
And I think that that's something we have to be really cognizant of, is just like, we love all the benefits of it, but this is going to heighten our need to be vigilant and to be really careful about what we click and what we believe is really somebody else online.
Well, and we actually saw this the other day. We had a very fascinating fraudulent email sent. And the way it worked is somebody sent an email to a secretary of an executive, and the email appeared to be a full exchange, like a full thread of emails going back and forth between her boss, the executive, and the person sending the email, talking about this charity donation that they were working on setting up. It was an entire back and forth set of threads in the email. Does that make sense? Like the fraud was.
It would say like RE colon or FW colon and then a thread. And it's like you open it and it has all the indentations and the color changes and it looks like a whole history, right?
Well, and it's a complete communication about, supposedly, from this executive talking to this other person about this charitable thing they wanted to support and agreeing on a $10,000 donation to this charitable cause.
Wow.
Right? And then, of course, it's like, oh, can we get this set up? What was really interesting is this, I'm almost positive, I'm 99% sure that thread was generated by an AI, because attackers, again, they automate. They assume that 99% are not going to work. The only way they make money is to hit as many victims as quickly as possible, and they need the 1% to kind of pay out. So to generate this kind of thread, I'm 99% sure they took ChatGPT or which is an AI program, if you're not familiar with it, and generate this thread, and they can do it automatically. And so at the touch of a button, you can send an email that looks insanely realistic.
Yeah, and the key there is that time is money with them. So they're going to want to churn out, like you said, as fast as possible. So I have no doubt they're using that. And it's a little bit scary of like what capabilities there are out there. And that's just very basic. I know it's going to get much worse than that, where it's going to actually have voice or video or faces and that, or voices. And that kind of scares me. Right. But we also have to, that just gets down to building that instinct. I think that, so I would qualify as a millennial, right? And in my generation, we didn't grow up with the internet. Like, we had to memorize phone numbers, right? But we grew up learning about the internet, and we grew up in I would say the heyday of like when we were using the internet was like pop-ups.
Sure.
Right. So we had the pop-ups, and we knew those are bad. Those are toxic. That is bad. And we saw the spam get created. Like, we saw the beginning of spam emails and spam communication. And it was so, like, you actually look back at it and you go, how did anyone believe this? It's like neon, orange and black saying click here. And it's like, no, obviously I'm not going to click there. This is stupid.
Yeah.
But people did. And I think that we've built an instinct of being suspicious. And I don't think everyone has had that opportunity. But I also think that there's a lot of there's generational differences based on your experience with these types of things to know what to look for. What are some of the ways that you can help, especially with the folks that you teach, building that instinct of not clicking so damn fast or taking a pause, taking a breath? What are some of the ways we can make this a habit to just be a little bit more safe?
You basically have to start with the deep-seated belief that your email is inherently untrustworthy. You just have to start from that point. So, for example, let's say you're buying a house. You will need to work with clearing, what's it called? The
clearinghouse or the broker or the underwriter?
Yeah, I'm blanking right now. The one
Realtor?
where you actually send the money to it.
Escrow?
Escrow. Anyway, they will send you wiring information.
Yes.
You have to not trust what you get by email. So typically they'll want to do a conversation by phone where the phone number. You've got it trusted from some source. If you're using the internet, if you browse to a website, it used to say HTTP or HTTPS in your browser. Now it just gives a lock icon.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
If there is a lock icon, for the most part, again, it's all risk calculation, but for the most part, you can trust that website is authentic. So if you go to a website and it gives and it's a locked website and it gives you a phone number, you can usually trust that. And so that's a phone number you can call, you can verify. If you get instructions by email that have anything to do with financial information, you immediately just have to ignore it. Just stop. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. And you have to go to the lock website. Again, lock meaning the lock and the icon in the corner. Trusted number that you already know, somebody that you've already made a connection with. You just can't trust the email.
I agree. And one thing that I've done is if someone does send that information, there's a transaction that's pending and this is something you're communicating about. I've seen this behavior where people will send $1 or send something small, depending if there's fees or whatever, just to prove that it went through and that the person that you intended to receive it got it, just to make sure that channel is safe, right? So they can throw in, a minimal amount that they don't mind risking, a small deposit, and say, I'm just doing that to make sure it worked, right?
Right. There's a lot of fraud, though, where people have sent emails saying, this happened to a number of real estate transactions. Our business account information has changed. Wire the money back. We're going to send it through a different account. And then they wired it to a fraudulent person and the money was lost.
Wow.
No, it's a huge problem. So basically, don't trust email. If you're expecting a transaction by email, that's fine. That's okay. I was expecting this, but even then, it'll usually involve a link that you want to go down and make sure that the link is going to the website that you think it is. So if you're having a transaction, let's say Capital One, right? First of all, you should be expecting it. If you get an email you weren't expecting, just now you already know this is a problem.
Yeah.
But if you were expecting it, somebody's like, oh, I'm going to send you a link for transferring money, whatever else. There should be a link where if you hover your mouse over it, you just kind of put your mouse on the link, it will show you where it's actually going to go to. The email can lie. It can print a link that's false, but if you hover over it, it will show where you're really going. And you want to make sure it says HTTPS. The S is crucial, and it better be the website you were expecting. Honestly, a lot of people will not have the security savvy to be 100% sure about that. If you're not sure, call the bank, call the person, do whatever you have to do to be absolutely certain about it, because there are so many ways for this to be fraud.
Yeah, that's a great practice too. And I've done that before too, where I've just said hey, I got this link. Can you just confirm? Or my husband, we were looking into my mother-in-law's situation, and we were looking at these emails she was getting. And there was a point where, and I don't remember exactly the details, but looked at properties of either the email address or the image, or we were looking at something in there and just looking at the properties to see what the sourcing was. And I'm not very savvy about this stuff, but I know that we kind of dug in and we were like, okay, this is legitimate, which is what was even scarier. Like it was a real car application, for example. And she was alarmed that she got that. So, there were definitely some measures we had to take, right? Like now we have to call the dealership and be like, how did you issue a car application to this person? Like, did you get a driver's license copy? Now we have a whole new problem. So it's also understanding that sometimes the email itself, like you could dismiss it as spam or a scam or phishing and be like, I'm not going to engage with this. But you also have to think about like, how did they get this?
Right.
What else might be happening if I'm getting this information?
Well, let me tell you a story because it's kind of like that. I have a friend who runs a small business, and they had a vendor who there was some fairly large purchase coming up. Fairly large. I can't remember 5 digits, 6 digits. It was a fairly large purchase.
Yep.
Just before it was due to be paid, about a couple of days before, they got an email saying, okay, our bank information has changed. It's a new bank account number. Please use this number. They checked. A lot of times when it's a scam, it comes from a false email address, one that's just pretending. This was the real email address. Mm-hmm. And so he had an underling who was like, I think this is fine. Let's change it. And my friend who owns the company said, look, I want you to call them and get a verbal confirmation that this is real. So he sends him off to do that. It comes back later. It says, yep, it's real. I called. It's correct. We should change it. So they change it. They pay it. A few days later, they get contacted from the vendor being like, why didn't you pay this? He immediately starts looking into it. And he calls the associate employee back and says, you got verbal confirmation, right? And he stammered for a minute and he said, well, I called, but I got a voicemail. I didn't get a hold of the person, and I left a voicemail message. And then I got an email from them saying that, yes, everything was correct. Here's what had happened. The vendor had been hacked. There were people in their email system. They could see all the email. They had a transcription service for voicemail that would transcribe to email. Wow. So when the person called, left the voicemail, the intruders saw the voicemail, went ahead and sent an email saying, yes, this is all legitimate. And my friend said to him, I told you to get verbal confirmation. Why didn't you? And he said, I thought you were being paranoid. Okay. The reason I was tying this into your previous comment is this was coming from a legitimate source. This was the real email account. When you see something like that, if it is false, that needs to be reported so that they could clean up their systems and get whoever had intruded in their systems out. So
absolutely
important to pay attention.
That is wow. Because I would assume, right? Because you always want to have the benefit of the doubt. Because you're going, well, that makes sense that they got my voicemail and now they're emailing me and telling me, yeah, it's fine. That is intricate. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That is nuts. And it's just thinking like that is always a risk. Like that is always going to be, it's a, the varying magnitude of risk, but there's always a risk that something like that can happen to you.
Yep. For our accounting, for the companies that I help, the policy that I always establish is nothing is paid based on an email, or at least not on an email alone. There has to be some additional validation to authenticate the information.
Definitely. And then obviously the payment information as well. If you're going to be sharing information, like you never share bank account information via email and things like that.
Right. Absolutely not.
For us, that's kind of the basic stuff. And I didn't mention this to you before, but I think this is an opportunity because I didn't cover this with Kathy as much. But so, for example, I work in accounting. I am a CPA, and I handle tax returns. I handle tax return information. And that is of utmost importance to keep secure. Oh my gosh, we are definitely a target. No matter how good my cybersecurity is and my behavior, there's always going to be a hacker that's trying to go after an accounting firm because they know we have the socials. Yeah. They know we have all the information.
And the
They can see
tax
how much
returns
money.
and everything. It's a lot. Yes.
Yeah, tax returns, bank account information, and socials. Like you can do so much damage with that, right? So we are a target. So one thing that I consistently remind my clients of is even in my email signature, and I know not all of y'all listen to this, but is like, for the love of everything, use our portal to
Yes.
submit any information like that, because people are sending me their tax returns via email. People are sending me their, their tax documents, their W-2s via email. Can you just, and you're shaking your head, right? So those of you listening, Seth is like, no, no.
No.
But I want someone else besides me, because mom can tell you all day not to do this, but you're never going to listen.
Yeah.
So could you just kind of reiterate like why I am such a B word when it comes to please do not email me these documents?
There's yeah, there's a couple of reasons. The first one is email can be insecure by itself. There's always a risk
Right.
that an email will get forwarded. Something will happen. It's just don't put
It's
things in there.
uncontrollable. I feel like once it's out there,
Correct.
it's out there for everyone to go see, grab, touch, feel.
Correct.
It's just kind of out there. Yeah.
But the other thing is, and this is what we're talking about, you can't trust the source. So let's say that you have a high profile client. They're in the public eye somehow, even maybe just, there might still be a medium business, but they've showed up, there's some publicity, something. And it's known that you're the CPA for them. Well, if both sides are in the habit of sending and processing data that's sent over email, then a scammer could send you an email pretending to be a client, in a way that maybe there's a big return, or there's some way that they're going to use this against them, right? So the biggest problem is that you just can't trust where it's coming from. When you use the portal, again, that should be using HTTPS. If it's using that, then you have some authentication that you're talking to who you think you're talking to.
And you mentioned the S a couple times. What does that mean?
So HTTP it's an acronym that means it sounds so dumb. Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And it was the protocol that was created for doing web transfers. Just I want a web page. I use HTTP to request the web page. When I say of course, I mean the browser uses HTTP to request the web page. It's just a way of communicating.
Right.
But HTTP is completely in the clear, meaning the data could be intercepted, it could be altered, it could be changed. HTTPS is HTTP secure, and the HTTP runs over an authenticated encrypted channel, meaning one, the data is encrypted, so it can't be read, but even more, or at least as importantly, you know who it's coming from. So if you go to a website, mybank.com, and it's HTTP, you might not actually be at mybank.com. It could look like mybank.com. It could have all the icons. It could have logins. It could do all kinds of things, and it might be the mob. When you use HTTPS, there is some authentication. It's a little bit complicated how it works, but there's some authentication that is actually providing evidence that you're talking to mybank.com.
Got it. Now, are there any other, now that's something I didn't actually know. Like I knew there was an S and there was a good thing about it, but I didn't really know why. And it just got me thinking, are there any other examples, Seth, of things that maybe are commonly misunderstood or commonly missed that really, like, if the whole world just knew more about this one thing, or knew that this wasn't true, or this thing existed, like it would just make everybody a lot more secure. Do you have any other examples of maybe some of these small details that can really make a difference?
Well, I'm going to repeat it again just because I do all the time, and that is your password manager. If people actually saw how password cracking works and how a cracked password just opens up the world for an attacker, everybody would use a password manager. If everybody understood the gravity of the situation, everybody would stop what they were doing right now. Are you listening, listeners? Listeners, if you're listening right now, I'm putting this thought in your brain. Pause the podcast, go get a password manager, and when you have your password set up, come back and unpause the podcast. It's actually that important. So if everyone understood just how significant this issue was, everybody would go get a password manager right now.
I agree. It's the same thing. It's just this is the stuff that like it ain't fun all the time to hear it, but it's something that we need to do to protect ourselves because I'll tell you what's not fun, getting hacked.
Right.
That's less fun.
Well, and parents should teach their kids. Like I've been pushing my
Yes.
kids to use a password manager and they hate it, but they know that they will get in big trouble if they want to keep those devices. They will have a password manager and they will be using it. Once you start using it, and actually you can find that it can be pretty convenient. A lot of them have plugins where you don't even enter your password anymore. You push a button and everything. And so it can actually be convenient and easy, but you have to make this transition. You have to make this mindset transition. And once you do, it's worth it and it's not that bad.
I agree. It's kind of just a habit you have to build. And then once it's part of the routine, you really don't think much of it. And it just becomes
Right.
kind of embedded in your behavior.
Right.
Right. So, Seth, any other kind of parting words of advice for those listening? I know the password manager is paramount, but is there anything else that you can leave our listeners with by way of education or advice for our business owners out there who want to learn more about this or just feel like they need to, get more immersed in it?
Yeah. So I would recommend hiring a security professional for some trainings. Just get a training once a month, have them under NDA, learn a little bit about your business so their trainings can be focused. Having an expert help you know what you need in your individual business will really open up your mind. You'll have a lot of insight and it'll really help in how you approach things.
I totally agree. I love that idea. And, because you don't have to have somebody, you have to have a CISO or have somebody in-house that needs to constantly be monitoring this. I think that a business of any size could have some type of consultant come in, review your security, kind of give you a diagnostic, if you will, and help you
That's
kind
right.
of close those gaps, right?
That's right. Do a lunch
Perfect.
talk. Yeah, just a lunch talk, chat about some of the security issues being seen, the type of phishing emails that are out there. It really helps employees. It helps the C-suite. Really is very beneficial to just get a little bit of training from people in the trenches.
Totally. And how can folks learn more from you and find out more about how they can consume content that you're putting out there?
Well, we're always able to be contacted at crimsonvista.com. That's my consulting company. Always happy to help people get some training. We do some CISO services. We do diagnostics. We're actually capable, if you're a company that builds software, we're actually software experts. We can go in and look at the security all the way down into your source code.
Wow.
So we're always happy to help out if you've got a security project that needs us. I have a book coming out that's actually based on what I'm teaching my class. So it's called Discovering Cybersecurity, a technical introduction for the absolute beginner. And it goes through a bunch of core technology concepts like authentication. That's like passwords and some of these kind of things. It goes through some basics of how attackers use these networks to get into your systems. It even has the very first chapter is actually about psychology. So it's kind of an interesting guide to kind of introduce some of these technical concepts. And then, we are currently not producing a lot of content, but that's actually one of our initiatives. We're planning a YouTube channel, and who knows, maybe even a podcast. That's another one we're considering.
That's awesome. So can you say one more time the name of the book, and we'll make sure we're linking that in the show notes when we air this episode?
Yeah, it's called Discovering Cybersecurity, a technical introduction for the absolute beginner. It's available on pre-order from Amazon right now. Should be available a little later this year.
Perfect. Guys, check that out. Definitely sign up for the pre-order for that and engage with Seth and his company if you're interested in learning more about their services. Seth, thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.
I can't believe how many episodes we've released of Keep What You Earn. There are literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in tax savings contained in our episode library. And there are so many topics that we cover. To make it easier to find more of what you need right now, we actually created a custom curated playlist just for you. That's right, a playlist of value-packed episodes that you're looking for based on your goals right now in your business. Whether you're making your first sale, trying to strategize your taxes, or you're scaling your team, there is something here for everyone. Check out the podcast playlist generator now using the link in the show notes and explore your custom playlist. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and review on your podcast platform. This small action goes a long way for podcasters to get our message heard by more business owners just like you. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to information about our guests and ways to get in touch with me. We'll see you on the next episode.